Say your affair was the best thing to have happened to you, and upon hearing that, there is so much I want to ask. It's not something you hear very often. We really want this episode to be a very open and honest conversation about affairs and marriages. Much of what we do here is trying to understand writers of all kinds, whether it be research experts, journalists, poets, or authors of memoirs like yourself. We really want to understand you, and we're framing this conversation around your book, My Husband's Affair Became the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. So the first question I have for you is, did you know all would be well? I've heard people in the past that I even know personally say things like, whenever there's tumultuous emotion, they still unshakably know that everything would be fine. They knew they would have to walk through the desert, so to speak, and endure horrific amounts on an emotional level, but it was all going to be fine. Did you have that belief or that faith that all would be well? And if you did, how did you know that?
Absolutely not. It was the most chaotic time of my life. And actually, every time, like, it's interesting because my situation happened all the way back in 2000. And so, if you think about what happened in 2001 with 9/11, and I think at least those of us around at that time, we watched the rerun of those Twin Towers over and over again, where it was like one story against the other would collapse into ground zero, basically. And it was interesting because it was a trigger that reminded me of my husband's affair, because I always felt like if the Twin Towers represented my life, my values, what I believed in, what I thought that I had, what I thought that what my life was going to be, the moment that my husband told me about his affair was as if my life was those towers, and it just went boom, 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 until there's absolutely nothing left. And you're just standing there staring at your life, and it's ground zero, and nothing is as it was, and you don't know if it ever can be. And I never recommitted myself to my marriage until 2 years after. And by the way, I just have to correct something. And this is a very common mistake that I get from interviewers every time I've been interviewed. But I never said my husband's affair was the best thing that ever happened to me. I said it became the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the most devastating experience of my life. And it was who, and also just all, I think it's relevant because some people say, oh, we're going to hear from somebody who says that her husband's affair was the best thing that ever happened to her marriage. And notice that the title of my book isn't, my husband's affair became the best thing that ever happened to my marriage. I said it became the best thing that ever happened to me. And I believe that I would have still written a book even if my marriage wasn't reconciled. And I believe I would have given it the same title, because the personal growth work that I had to do in order to recover is what made me this better, stronger person on the other side. And that's a choice that we all have, whatever suffering life might throw at us. So, but no, I absolutely did not have confidence that things would be okay. And many times I was confident in that, like I would say, it took me about 2 years to heal. I was sure that it would not be okay. And I was actually faking it in my marriage, thinking that I just needed to get through the time till my kids were raised and launched, and then I would divorce my husband. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
apologize for that mistake. I remember trying to think that I need to make sure I say that because there's that distinction. It's really important, especially because you say it about yourself and not your marriage. And I like how you said that you would say the same thing even if it hadn't been reconciled. I think that's really important. But it was more about you than your marriage, and that's really
Yeah.
admirable.
Yeah, I would never suggest to anyone that wanted to improve their marriage that they might try an affair, because there's certainly no guarantees that a couple will recover. And if they do recover, like, this is what I do now in my work, is walk couples that want to through the recovery process. And obviously, I don't have 100% success rate, but any one of those couples, if you ever had a chance to interview them, would beg you not to do this and not to go through both
Yeah.
sides. The fleeting pleasure, if you will, of the affair is nothing compared to the pain that you go through on the other side. And oftentimes you lose everything. So many people have lost their jobs over it. A lot of affairs happen in the workplace. People have lost their income over it. People have lost the respect of their children. People have lost friends and family members. And even those that reconcile, for the one that has the affair, it takes time. And they often, if you really love the person that you're with, the pain that you see, the pain that you in their eyes, and you look at it, and that you're responsible for it. And so, I would not want to be the person that had to, for 2 years, look into the eyes of the person that I love more than anybody else and see this incredible pain and know I'm responsible for it. Yeah.
Yeah. As you've already alluded to, in life there are these really incredible and harsh coincidences that happen sometimes. If someone said what makes a meaningful life, I guess you'd probably say your husband, the life he created, your parents and also his family, and just everything that you held dear. Did you ever feel like those things had been, even momentarily, snatched away, just kind of came crumbling down like a house of cards?
Yeah, that's how it felt. And so there was a lot of evaluation of things that had to happen, and a lot of realizations of things that, I believed to be true that weren't true. One of the things that I find in working with couples through this is that their healing will always come through the paradigm of their worldview. And so, I am a Christian, and so that's my worldview. But I believed that because I was a Christian, that I would never go through something like this. And of course, that's very false. So, um, I also, one of the things that was really valuable for me, I think that helped me to get through this, especially considering that when I went through this journey, there was not professionals who were willing to address affair stuff. Even when I went to see a counselor, the counselor wouldn't even say the word affair. He said, let's talk about there was a crisis in your marriage. And I actually had to get kind of assertive. I'm like, has something so terrible happened in my life that you actually can't say the word out loud? Because if you can't say the word affair out loud, you're not going to be my counselor. But today,
Yeah.
there's a lot more help that people have, and professionals have recognized the need to address this issue head on, and that it's not just about the marriage, that it is its own ball game. But one of the things that helped me with not having that help is I had set my life goals before all of this happened. And for example, one of the goals that I had was that about what kind of a woman that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a woman that was known for my love of other people, for my joy, for my patience, for my goodness, for my kindness, and those kind of characteristics. And so even though the rug was pulled out from under me and I was devastated, I came back to those goals and I thought, I am still going to be that woman. And it kind of gave me an anchor. There was only one goal that I rewrote at that time and changed, and that was the one where I had a goal of staying married to my husband throughout our lifetimes, like carrying out the wedding vows. But I realized that I had set a goal that was dependent on the choices of another individual. And I don't have control over the choices of another individual. So for a while, I kind of crossed that goal off. And then, as we did heal our marriage, I rewrote the goal, but the goal is now different. My goal is to be the best wife that I can be for my husband. And so even like I hypothetically say, if my husband were ever dumb enough to have another affair, I would probably divorce him, but I could still attain my goal in knowing that from my side, I had been true to myself and who I wanted to be. So, but my beliefs about other people became more realistic, I guess you could say, a little less, yeah,
Yeah.
idealistic.
Yeah, I do see here a lot of people online, they put their own needs secondary to their partners. just to fulfill those vows, to fulfill that commitment. And I think that is really unhealthy.
Agree.
Yeah. So I want to just go back to how it all started. So what was the process from finding out how it happened, how the affair happened, to where you are today?
In my situation, my husband did confess his affair to me. And so a lot of people will say, oh, that you must be so happy about the fact that he confessed rather than discovering or finding out. But people need to know that he didn't get any points from me for that confession, because in many ways the confession was forced. In my situation, the woman who was the other woman was bound and determined to marry my husband. And so she was going to tell me if he didn't. So he merely weighed that out. And I am thankful. It was better to hear it from him than from her. But what I'm saying is she forced his hand. If she would have been content to be the other woman, who knows? Maybe it would have gone on a lot longer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you wonder whether you'd ever found out if that the person hadn't
Yeah.
placed that hand on
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah, and having worked with so many other couples now, I often see that people get what I would call stuck kind of in the affair. And it sounds weird, like, why wouldn't they just end it? But the only way for it really, truly to end the way that it needs to is through a confession to the spouse. And because they're so afraid of the fallout, they're so afraid of the negative reaction, they're so afraid their spouse might leave them. And it's shameful and embarrassing. So you tend to not confess. But then what happens is you have a secret with somebody else. And when you have a secret with somebody else, it actually bonds you closer together. So on a bad day, you think to yourself, oh, I'll just call this person and we'll just talk. I won't re-engage the affair. But then when they talk, they always re-engage the affair. So,
As I reflect, the thing that blew me away was your ability to be so calm and rational and objective. That I think it was really quite admirable, because honestly, if I was put in a situation like that, I would be really just an emotional wreck, like externally as well. Like you still put yourself together, you still like dressed up, you still like made the house like tidy, like cooked food, which honestly I don't know how you did. Like I can't imagine myself doing that. Do you think that was because of the pressures around being a perfect wife, or was it just like part of something else?
a lot of it was very unhealthy, like it was a direction of the pain. And I find that, it's interesting because anybody who has not gone through this would know that it would be really bad and that they would not want to be betrayed by their husband or their wife. But when you go through it, it's actually far worse than you ever imagined that it would be. And I find that the pain tends to manifest in one of three ways. You either are so sad and so depressed that you lock yourself in your room, perhaps, and have the blinds closed, and you can't imagine coming out and facing the day. That's one example. Or you might go into this extreme anger where, kind of like the Carrie Underwood song, where you're tempted to take a Louisville slugger to his car, or, four-wheel drive, whatever. And then there's what I call the heroic mode, where you're trying to save the marriage at all costs and you're trying to get back to your sense of normal. And so you might be, reading stuff online like crazy, ordering books about how to recover, signing up for counseling or seminars. And in me doing that perfectionist thing and trying to win him back through that, it was my manifestation of the pain. And I would say that it was very unhealthy. Not that it was wrong, but my husband would tell you today that, he noticed me doing those things, but that had nothing to do with his decision to come back into the marriage and to grow and become a better man through this process. So,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. So going back, would you change the way like you reacted, or was that just something that you had to do to cope?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if one would have the ability. There's a lot of things I would change. Yeah. Um, yeah. I would, I mean, it would have been nice if one had more help and what more understanding. I think I would have suffered less if I would definitely have suffered less if I knew then what I know now, because one of the struggles was believing that it was about me. And I would now understand that it wasn't about me. I mean, there probably would have been a lot of similarities because something that I did right was, which was really some good advice that I got from some good friends, which was the part where, because initially, um, it was kind of like there was 5 days after he confessed that we didn't have a chance alone to talk. And when we finally got that chance alone to talk, then I wasn't calm that day. I was in his face, her or me, make up your mind. I am not sharing my husband. And he shouted her then, and it was like it was all over. And in my mind, I heard the words, I'm divorcing you and marrying her. Looking back and having done the work that we've done and understanding, I now know and see and understand that my husband, as do many people, has the kind of personality that if you back him into a corner, he might say something mean just to get out of the corner because he doesn't know what else to do, like like a lion trapped in a corner that attacks, right? That's what that was. I had him backed into a corner. He had no way out. So he just lashed out her then, right? It was just mean words spoken. It wasn't words that he meant. But I didn't, know that. But in that, when I went to see my friends after, they said, Anne, you can leave this marriage if you want, and you have every right to do so, and nobody would blame you. But we've seen you and Brian together. We know Brian loves you. We don't get what's going on right now. So we just encourage you to not make a decision in the emotion of the moment. Like, don't leave, because I spent half my childhood in Copenhagen, Denmark, and that was my plan, was to go back, quote, home. And it would have been quite final. And so but then I didn't have the ability to be neutral. I didn't have the ability to just like, well, I'll just like carry on with my life and see what happens. And so I put the passion and the energy into the cleaning of the house and the trying to look great. And I don't know that I could have eaten regardless. And I was very mixed up in those days, but it affected my appetite. And I would say that I was mostly unable to eat. I was that emotionally stuck, but it didn't hurt. I had a few pounds to lose and I lost them. And so the self-esteem boost was timely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was really sad to hear that like you stopped eating because of it. Like I just can't imagine like, going through that kind of pain and then also having to like try and be as neutral as possible to like if you want to move on, instead of letting your emotions take over. Um so you mentioned how like when you told your mother about the affair that she said that I think she said most men don't stay faithful to their wives throughout their lifetime. I think something along those lines. And I think we've heard that like quite a few times generally. Did the affair make you question whether like monogamy is natural, or did it make you question whether you should just forgive him because most men do it anyways?
Um, I mean, I guess my mother's advice came as a bit of a shock to me because prior to my husband's affair, she'd actually never liked my husband and had often sort of felt like she was against the marriage, and suddenly she was taking a different stand. Looking back, I would say that, my mother is one who's never been successful in love. And I think she had a little bit of a sour grapes situation going on, and that we were to her unrelatable. She couldn't relate to this love that we had. And then the imperfection of an affair happened. We became more relatable to her. And it actually strengthened not only my relationship with my mom, but my mother had a better view of my husband weirdly after that. Um, Questioning monogamy, no, that would be just related to, I don't know, something inside of me that is just so deep that I believe that it is monogamy it's something that you choose. It's kind of like your question reminds me of in 2006, I worked with Peggy Vaughn, and we helped CNN producers produce a documentary on affairs. And they promised that this was going to be sensible journalism. And they interviewed couples that we had connected that with them, and they were going to present this balanced view. But what actually happened of this 1 hour documentary, and it's kind of like in these 15-minute segments where there are maybe 12 minutes, and then you've got commercials. Well, the first 12 minutes was given to the scientists who studied apes and had concluded that apes are not monogamous, and then drawn the conclusion that therefore human beings couldn't be. And I remember being absolutely horrified at this attempt at journalism, because if other people are satisfied for their husband to have the intelligence level of an ape, then that's up to them. But for me, the fact that apes aren't monogamous does not convince me that I should be satisfied with something less. So I think that for the strength of families, for the strength of children that we're raising, I think that loving each other, like the true love and the strongest lovers are the ones who actually can love the same person for a lifetime. And it's a skills. Anybody can have it. And so, like, from where I sit, and we've now been married 42 years, and I can tell you that I'm still madly in love with my husband, and I know that he's madly in love with me, and we experience this chemistry and this connection. And we still have mountaintop experiences together. And I feel that we have the best of both worlds. And I don't know if you're familiar with, in America, we have a TV show that called The Cold Case Files, where they solve crimes from 30 years ago. And then they show the person like maybe they're 50 or 60 years old. And then they'll kind of morph the show to kind of show a scene of when they were young in their 30s. And I feel like I remember the 22-year-old young guy, with the huge arm muscles and the six pack and the long curly hair, that I married. And I still see that, and it's kind of like an episode of the Cold Case Files. It's like he morphs in my mind because I remember, and we have all of our history and all of the good of our past, but and we also get to like keep our money and our wealth and not having to give it up. But we also, because we've learned and we constantly grow and change and reinvent ourselves, we get to have the today. Whereas if I divorced my husband, I wouldn't, like one of the joys that we have at our age is our grandkids. Anybody with grandkids would tell you that if you have grandchildren, that if you knew how great they were, you would have had them first. But but we get to do it together. And when there's an issue going on with one of our kids, we both care. And I say to myself, like, really, could somebody else love my grandkids as much as their own grandfather? Like, really? And so, it's that joy that we have together, plus then the new. And I don't think we would, I always say, like, if I would have divorced my husband and let's say I would have married somebody new, for me personally, I would not have been interested in marrying somebody that was far outside of my own age category. I would need somebody on my own maturity level. So I would have married an old guy.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, that's amazing to hear. Like, that's honestly so sweet. Honestly, what you were saying before about like the whole like ape and like being like men, it just makes me think about how people on TikTok people will say like, oh, when men cheat it's not as bad as when women cheat, because when men cheat it's purely physical. And I think that's so sad that people just, it's like almost animalistic the way that people view men, that they have no emotions whatsoever. And you see it in other regards as well. It's like, oh, they can just completely disconnect from emotion, they don't have to feel that. And it's just really sad that that seems to be the case. So that's why I hear people say like when a woman cheats, it's just worse because there's emotions involved. What do you think about these claims? Because I really think they're so disgusting.
Very disgusting. You're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more that That's sad that there is a cultural bias still in our society today that views women as, sluts and whores when they're the ones that are unfaithful, and then somehow almost views a man as like, oh, a Don Juan, or he has machismo, or and uh, and I think there's a real imbalance in our culture where men are also looked on as sort of a lower level of the species, and they're greatly misunderstood. For many years in the past, you go back to the 1950s and beyond, like women were oppressed and held down by men. But I'd almost draw the argument that the opposite is true. A couple of years ago, I was in a fancy shopping mall, kind of shopping in a high-end fashion store, and I came across a t-shirt, and I can't remember the exact words, but it was something to the effect of, if you want something done right, don't ask a man to do it, he'll screw it up, you know. And it made me angry because I held it up, not that the clerk in the store is responsible for that slogan on a t-shirt, but honestly, if the t-shirt would have said, if you want something done, don't ask a woman to do it because she'll screw it up for sure, everybody would be in an uproar. Why is it okay to throw one gender under the bus and not throw the other gender under the bus?
Exactly. It's like gender equality. Like it only works in like the women's favor now. Like it's like it's just the tables have turned. It's like we're allowed to like neglect like the needs of men, or like make them put them in a negative light. Like that's fine.
Yeah.
That's what I really don't like about like certain like strands of feminism, where it's just like, let's elevate women and like degrade men. It's like, shouldn't we have learned from history that not to do that? Not to like demonize a whole gender, or like make objective statements about them.
Exactly. And not to see like there is gender differences, generally speaking, between, and I think there's beauty in it. I think there's attraction in it. I think there's, like, generally speaking, a man might be better equipped to handle like emergency situations, tends to stay more calm, and tends to just take charge. And like, that's a really great quality to have, whereas so we need to respect the differences and see the good in it instead.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Much men and women aren't the same. They still deserve to be treated with the same amount of respect.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. So when he first told you about the affair, you basically forgave him immediately. I know so many people would like react with anger, like I know I would, and I just was wondering why you were so quick to forgive him, and do you think he deserved to be forgiven so quickly?
Yeah. So something that should be clarified is, yes, when my husband told me that, and nothing had prepared me for that moment. Like, as I even alluded to in my book, it's ironic to me that the night that I was to come home and hear this information, I was coming from voice lessons, and I had been singing in my car to the song by Toni Braxton, "Unbreak My Heart," which is all about somebody having an affair. And I'm singing, belting out the words to that song, loudly, thinking, what a great song. This is right in my range. I can sing it really well. And then I remember thinking, but boy, these lyrics are really depressing. Good thing that would never happen to me. And so I wasn't prepared. So I am very embarrassed about those words that I spoke when I said, I forgive you. But what I now understand is those words had nothing to do with forgiveness. What those words were was denial. That was like me saying, okay, let's pretend you didn't say that. That didn't happen. You're not going to see her anymore. I'm going back to my Cinderella life. And it was almost like I was sticking my fingers in my ears and going, la, 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 I don't hear you. That's
Yeah.
what that was, on hindsight. So really, and 5 months later, or about then, there was an incident where, it's a long story. So, but where I told him, I forgive you again. And there was kind of like a thing from a course that we had done. And that again wasn't forgiveness either. what that was a sort of like a decision to engage the process of forgiveness. If I look back on it, it was like, because for real forgiveness of something big like this is a process. So it was beginning the process, probably about 5 months in. But the forgiveness really never happened until 2 years out. And you're right about the anger. Like, if there's one thing that people don't relate to as much, in my book, because anybody that's gone through this will relate to it, is sometimes they'll say, you didn't seem as angry as I might be. And that's just because personality wise, people have different responses. And some people, like, anger is hurt that is turned outward, and sadness is hurt that is turned inward. And some people have a tendency to go a little bit more one way or the other. So I have a tendency to turn a little bit more inward and be a little bit more calculated, probably even a little bit more passive aggressive about how I would handle my pain, as opposed to the spur of the moment, just lashing out anger.
Yeah. I get what you mean, like just wanting things to go back to normal, just forgetting that ever happened, and just being like, let's just go back to that life before, because it just changes so much. It's like your whole world just falls apart and you don't expect it at all. Because like when I was reading your book, even though I knew what was going to happen, I still didn't expect it. Like, it sounds so weird, but the way you described your marriage is like so perfect. It's like what everyone, like the idea, what people really want, like what people try and look for in life. And then hearing that, it's surprising even knowing what was going to happen, if that makes sense, just from like a reader's perspective.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I've learned is that we have an idea in our culture that affairs happen because something is wrong in the marriage, and that affairs happen because somebody else is younger or prettier or better in bed or in some way better. And that is a myth. That's one of the things that I learned on the journey. And the more that I work with people, the more that I feel surprised. It's like the elephant in the room, that people didn't realize that, like, even if you're in a good marriage and you love your spouse, after you've been married for a little while, it's kind of like our sexuality is really important and close to our heart. And somewhere deep inside, each person wants to know that, maybe the way I'll put it is that they've got their mojo, like that members of the opposite sex would still be attracted to them. And so when a third party pays attention to you, it can draw you in. Like, if there's a temptation that happens with that, that doesn't mean you don't love your spouse, or and very rarely is the third party offering something better. It can seem that way at the time, but there's this lure of, and there's a dark side to human nature where, like one of the conversations, as I was trying to figure it out back then, trying to understand. So I believed that too. So it was like, well, what was so great about her that you would be with her? And he didn't know the answer really to those questions either. He's like, well, I don't know. We'd be together and we'd just laugh. And so I'd be like, okay, well, what did you laugh about? And he said, well, we'd laugh about, wouldn't it be funny if so-and-so or so-and-so saw us here having coffee together? And I realized in that moment, like, it is not possible for my husband and I to go out for coffee at a coffee shop and laugh hysterically about, wouldn't that be hilarious if our friends Joe and Mary saw us here? It would be totally normal. That's not fun. But so that's what I call the dark side of human nature. What made it fun is that it was a stolen moment, if you will.
When I read that, it made me so angry. I was like, well, is that really your benefit from like having an affair? Like being able to laugh about having it, Yeah, exactly. It's not better, it's just different. It's just different to what you're used to. So were you ever consumed of like any kind of vengeance or anger, or acted like out of like spite, whether this was towards Brian or the other women?
Yeah, I would say that I was, and that my anger initially was more directed towards the other woman, which I would say was misdirected. And I mean, okay, it should be equal, like they equally participated in this. wrong thing. But for me, I loved my husband. And one of the things I learned in this journey is that if you truly love somebody, um, you, love is not like a switch that you can just turn off in a moment. That's what people don't understand. So I hated what my husband did, but I still loved him. But the other woman in my situation was a stranger, someone that I didn't know. So it was easy for me to direct all of this anger and this emotion and this hatred towards a woman that I didn't know. And I also learned a lot about, like, I think that within all of us, like, when many people will argue that everybody is basically good inside, and there may be some truth to that, but I could also argue that everybody is basically bad inside, and there would be truth to that. And think it would be very accurate to say that, throughout my life, generally speaking, I'm a very loving and caring person. But through the pain that I experienced at that time, I found emotions of hatred coming up and that I didn't even know I was capable of. To the point that at times, especially in the early days, it was like I would find myself, I wasn't asleep, but like daydreaming, like I've just been lost in my head somewhere, emotionally hijacked. And I find myself wanting to fix my life. And you start thinking, if only she didn't exist, then I could get my life back. Of course, all of that's false. And so the next thing you know, I find myself fantasizing about killing her. And then I'm horrified because I actually did not know I was even capable of a thought like that before this happened. So, yeah, that's pretty revengeful. Happy to say that those
Yeah.
were short-lived moments in my head. But I can understand crimes of passion, how somebody could go there.
Yeah.
Especially if you tend more towards that outward thing. Um, Revenge towards my husband, I guess maybe some of the thoughts were there, but I perfectly well know that this is my logic, is that if somebody does something wrong towards you, it's sort of like they've lowered themselves on some level. They've lowered their moral standard. Their integrity has dropped. And I can logically think that if I respond with more hurtful behavior, one, I'm perpetuating the hatred, which I don't want to do, but I'm also then I'm doing the same thing. I'm lowering my standard. And then I have to see myself for who I am, somebody that lowered my standard, and I don't want to be that. So for that reason, no, I wouldn't let myself go there. The Bible says that if you are kind to your enemy, it's like heaping burning coals on their head. So there is something to be said for, I guess Oprah's saying that the best revenge is to live your best life. So I'm with her.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you almost give them like a sense of satisfaction, like for them, but depending on the person, like if they know you, they made you so upset. It's like just try and move on if you can. But
Yeah, so
yeah.
true.
So I've heard a lot, like when women get cheated on, that they feel that they're not attractive enough, and it's really sad that society is kind of like ingrained that when beautiful women are cheated on every day, like Beyonce was cheated on, that like you can be like a precarious person but still get cheated on. And it was interesting that when you confided in Laurie about your affair, she commented about like working on your appearance, and it just seems to and even if it wasn't intended to sound that way, it still sounds like, oh, you weren't pretty enough. And it just fuels the idea that men are just shallow and only prioritize physical attractiveness and emotional connection. Where do you think this idea stems from?
Where that idea stems from, I mean, and that's a good observation. I so agree with where you're at. I think it's old-fashioned beliefs. I mean, there is a part of our society that values women based on their youthfulness and on their beauty, and it is really sad because if that's the value of a woman, that's. I mean, I have a few hot buttons, things that make me angry in life, and that the fact that our society values women based on youthfulness and beauty, that makes me angry. because it's clearly so wrong, as if a woman has no value because she gets older. And it's interesting too, because I find that most women, we're kind of hypocritical as women, because on one hand we got the Me Too movement, and then on the other hand we play into it by spending fortunes on trying to increase our appearance, and 16-year-olds getting breast implants, and it's like, oh my gosh, do you not realize you're beautiful just the way you are? And like, to me, that's playing into that whole idealism. So I mean, it's a known fact that men are more visually stimulated, and so their sexual arousal comes from the appearance of a pretty woman when they're young. I'm going to add, when a man matures, and if a relationship has if he's learned, and if they've learned to strengthen their bond, then it's going to be other things that actually are what stimulates him. He gets more satisfaction out of the satisfaction his wife gets, actually. And so, yeah, old-fashioned ideas in our society. Some truth to that. There's that physical attraction, but those are shallow things in the long run. And I think deep are the regrets of men that have chased after them instead of something more lasting in love. I think that old movie, It's Complicated, with Meryl Streep and Alec Baldwin, I think it is. And he leaves his wife for a much younger woman, and he's in his 60s raising a 4-year-old, and is really rather hilarious. It turns out, and she's the young thing is kind of a bit of a dimwit compared to his wife, and it's very typical, right? So deep are the regrets.
Yeah, I honestly didn't know that like values generally changed over time with men. So like based on that, this is more of a general question. Like I would often like hear stories about like men like losing physical attraction to their wives, like whether it be from like they look different after they've had a child, or like aging, making, whatever it might be. Do you think that they ever like truly like love their partners if they can lose attraction over things like that, like very natural things?
If I think that they ever truly love their partner if their attraction is this just based on the physical things? No,
Yeah.
that's not a real love. No, that's superficial. Something interesting is that there's research that has been done about neural pathways in the brain. And whatever you're looking at the point of an orgasm is what you tend to bond with. And we were actually then designed to be looking into the eyes. If you look into the eyes of the same person, that neural pathway is reinforced, and it becomes like an autobahn of pleasure where all those endorphins go off in your brain, and that's what gives you the pleasure. When men have many partners, when they look at pornography, engage with prostitutes, and have all these different things, what happens is the neural pathways in the brain split, because you're bonding with different things all the time, to the point that some of the best kept secrets today is that there's many men who might be masturbating to pornography several times a day. And why are they doing that? Because they're not actually even having the pleasure of an orgasm anymore, because the neural pathways have become so small. There's such little endorphins released in the brain. So those that have the most enjoyable sexual pleasure are those that actually make love to the same person, looking into the eyes of the same person for a lifetime. And what happens is then, as a person ages, and so maybe you get a little bit of wrinkles and a little saggy boobs and a little cellulite, which, there's a lot a person can do to keep healthy and fit and maintain their appearance. And I think that's all great within a certain balance, and as long as it's what you want to do. But everybody still ages in time, but it's just looking into that woman's eyes that turns him on later. And so I was really encouraged when I came across that research, because I still believe that the strongest relationships are those couples who actually learn to develop that depth in their relationship. and to have that joy of life is going to throw you some tough stuff. Nobody escapes it. If it's not one thing, it's another. And it's a really wonderful thing to have a partner to go through thick and thin with. I'm not one that gives up when the times get rough. So
I really think that research needs to be like read more, because I honestly have never heard of that, and that's honestly that's like really like comforting to hear. I'm sure it would be for a lot of people. So did you ever receive scrutiny, for deciding to stay with a person who like cheated on you? Like when people found out, did you ever receive criticism?
that's a really great question, because, secretly and behind the scenes, not secret because I'm about to tell you, but I would be the more sensitive person in our marriage than my husband. And so when we made a decision to share our story publicly, before that, it was like a small group of support people who knew and everybody else did not know. And then we made it public, decided to tell our story. My husband and I had a conversation where he said, "Are you sure that you're ready to do this?" And the conversation was coming from a place of love because he knows me. And he knows that I'm the one that's sensitive to criticism. He can handle whatever, but not me. Because he said, that you can't write a book on such an emotionally charged topic and not get criticized. So that was good that he said that, and I really counted the cost. But my love and passion for helping people through this and having a story and really telling the truth of what it's like meant more, helping people meant more to me than that. So it was kind of like I put on this outward rough skin and I was ready to like face whatever it was going to be. But interestingly enough, we didn't get criticized. And when we appeared on radio and television programs all across the country, lots of newspaper and magazine articles. And when you do an interview, the person interviewing you really has control to show it in whatever light they want to show it. And our value of marriage seemed to be many ways countercultural. And so we were expecting the criticism, but it never came. And so we kind of stopped and asked ourselves, why did it not come? And what we believe is the difference is that deep down, every person can relate to this. If it's not personally in some way, then it's some other way. I always like to say that everybody's got a story. And, if there were hidden cameras from CNN following a person's life, from the moment that they're born, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, everybody's got a little bit of film footage that they'd be mighty embarrassed about if it was shown on national television. Nobody's kind of above that. So people can relate to failure, is what I'm saying. But what makes people mad is the denial. It's when they lie about it. It's what you do after the failure. That's the thing. And so my husband's owning it, manning up, working through it, not denying it, facing it head on, and just saying, yeah, I failed. I screwed up. I did the worst thing. That people admire the ownership of it. It's the denial. It makes me wonder back in, when I think about, like, for example, the whole Clinton Monica Lewinsky thing. And, it was such a big deal in the papers back then for so long. And it's like, but he kept lying. He kept saying, well-defined sex, and I didn't really have sex with that girl. And he kept going on. And it makes you think, and some people have said, well, presidents can't really do this. I don't know, then things need to change. But if he had just said from the get-go, I was wrong, I had sex with her, I betrayed my wife, I betrayed my country, I apologize to everyone for what I've done, I think it would have just gone away. But instead, it's the denial and the lying and the, trying to, I think that's what creates the negative story. So the bottom line is very minimal criticism. Mostly, it seems like admiration, and I think it's because people can relate to failure. And
Yeah, no, there's a lot of respect you have to have for people who like come out and like are very open with what they've done wrong and are also willing to change and make those improvements, because everyone is flawed. Like you said, people will be so quick to judge other people, but realistically, everyone's done something that's reprehensible. So being open and having that willingness to change, I think, is really admirable. Um, so I want to just talk more about the writing side of your book, because this is a podcast for writers as well.
That's what I
So
was expecting. Yeah.
yeah, we'll finish off with the writing questions. So I'd like to talk more about your writing process. So how did it feel, almost reliving your experiences whilst you were writing it? Because you went into a lot of detail, you wrote a lot of dialogue, it was like you reliving conversations. What was that like?
A lot of people would think that it was therapeutic, and I don't know that was or it wasn't. I was in a really good place emotionally when I was writing, and I felt very passionate about it. It's like I have a message to share with the world, and I want to share it. I was really glad that I had journaled when I was on my healing process, because I actually don't think I could have nearly done as good a job of writing the story if I didn't have my journals to refer back to, so I could get right into the emotions. And also we had kept and are published in our book a lot of the original letters that my husband and I had written to each other in that time frame. In fact, there is one love letter that my husband wrote me that was very special to me, and I carried it around in my back pocket for a long time as part of my healing. And when it came time I wanted to put it in the book, I actually couldn't find the letter, which was shocking. And I searched high and low, and I was like, I'm going to have to just kind of recreate this letter from memory the best that I can. So I did. And after I had done that, I found the original. They were pretty different. So my husband laughed about the one that I had recreated, and he said, I never would have wrote that. And so we both had a good laugh over it. But yeah, so it was, it was more, I was driven by a passion to help others, and I was excited about it. So for my husband, it was a bit more emotional when he finally proofread through. That was harder for him to read it than it was for me writing it. Yeah.
Yeah, reading a book, I was really surprised to see experts from your husband as well. I think that's very atypical of what you usually see. There's already no books on this kind of thing, and then also to have the your husband's perspective on it as well. I thought that was really cool and
Yeah.
interesting. So was there an exact moment that inspired you to start writing the book? Or when did you decide you're going to write a book and you're going to help people with it?
So that's a really great question. And the truthful answer completely overlaps with my faith. I became a Christian when I was 20 years old. And the short story is I had a pretty sinful past before that, shameful past. And there's a place in the Bible where it says that he who has been forgiven much, or she, loves much. And I think that's the story of my life. I've always felt this incredible awe that I had been given such a beautiful life with my husband and my kids. And so I love God a lot. And I pray to God. And I pray to God not in a formal or a religious way, but I feel that I can talk to him like a good friend or a father, and to talk things over with him. And I had an experience. I usually pray best when I'm walking, and I felt that God spoke to me. You're not going to claim to hear the audible voice of God, but sometimes it just comes so strong. And he said, I have a great blessing for you. Are you ready? And this was something that happened before the affair. And I remember feeling quite frightened, like this was a real spiritual experience. Like, what just happened? What was that? Like, if God speaks to you, it's a little bit like, whoa. And so eventually I began to ask God, like, why would you be asking me for permission to bless me? And why do I feel afraid when you ask me this question? But I didn't really get an answer. And all I know is I came to a place where I said, God, my life belongs to you, and whatever you want to do in my life, I am open. And then the affair happened. Now, I didn't make that connection right away. In fact, my prayer life took on a very different, more desperate nature while I was going through all of this. But when I came back to a place where I was in a really good place, I found myself, as my habit had been, out on a prayer walk again, just talking to God. And then I remembered, and it was like, hey, God, what about those conversations we had where you said that you had a blessing for my life? And was I ready? And then my life fell apart. What was the deal? And I felt like he spoke again, and he said, that was the blessing. And in that moment, I knew I was supposed to write a book, and I knew that I was supposed to share my story. Not that the blessing isn't like, well, I will admit that there was part of me that hoped that I would make a lot of money on my book and that it would be really great. What it has done, and probably because I've taken the time to study and learn a lot about marketing, which is important for any author to do. I mean, it is a fact that there's a lot of mediocre books that are bestsellers because someone's really good at marketing that stands behind it. And there's a lot of great books that never sell because the author doesn't know how to do the marketing. So it's kind of part of it, if that's your goal with writing a book. But so anyways, that was never really what happened. But the blessing is in how many people I've helped through my story. And there's really, there's no greater joy than that. When I get these emails back and people write to me and tell me what a difference and how I've given them an anchor of hope through their darkest hour, there could be no greater joy than making a difference for others. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful source of inspiration. And I was reading through like the reviews on Amazon for your book, and it was just like, so amazing to see like all these reviews like just relating to your experience and like using your book as a source of like hope, and that they can get through this like time in their marriage. Like I thought that was really wonderful. And you're so right about the whole marketing thing as well, Ryan. That's what we're trying to do, like expose more books, because it's really sad to see like really good books not get exposure they deserve. Okay, so when approaching the betrayal of like Helen or Brian whilst you're writing a book, like considering the betrayals, how did you manage to like maintain a balanced perspective, and like because you were so like honest with the way you talked about how they might have felt and why they did certain things, like you like even put yourself in like Helen's shoes, saying like if you were in a position would you have done the same thing? Like how did you manage to do that?
Well, maybe one of the things, and this would be my advice to any other writer, actually it'd be my advice to anyone who wanted to succeed in any endeavor, is if you think that you can accomplish it all on your own, that's not a good idea. No matter how smart and brilliant you are or talented at whatever that you do, there can be no replacement for asking for help. And I asked for help. And so I first attended conferences for writers and learned a lot more about writing, which was invaluable. And then there was the original writing. I had a writing coach that was like, I would feed her chapters as I'd write them, and then she would just give me commentary back, like, things. She would say things like, she'd ask questions that would cause me to clarify things. So I think that my writing coach had a big part to play in the balance, that the perspective that brings into it. And then once I had finished the original manuscript, I actually got 10 different test readers to read the whole thing and provide me with their honest feedback. And I intentionally chose people of like young and older. I chose educated and not educated. I chose men and I chose women, like very diverse people, people of faith, people with no faith, atheists. Like I got different viewpoints back. And I think that was part of how I was able to put that balance in there. Being able to hear, like, how is a reader hearing this? And then I made adjustments based on that feedback.
Yeah, no, that is a really like smart thing to do, because like I have no experience of like any of the things he talks about. I don't really read books like your books, but I honestly like loved it. Like I was like hooked. Like I read it all in one night and I just couldn't stop reading it. It was just one of those books I just couldn't put down. It's like I wanted to know what happened next, even though I kind of knew what's gonna happen next. It was just a really cool book. I really like I would recommend it. Um Okay, so lastly, just to end like more on a positive note, so looking back on your life, what advice would you like to share with others who may be or currently facing similar challenges in their relationships?
Great question. I think that to get help right away and get perspective, and to give yourself a break and not expect too much from yourself right away, to realize that betrayal is a trauma. And so you have to distance yourself at least 3 months, if not 6 months, from the initial finding out before you make final decisions about anything. And that the first things that you need to focus on are actually eating and sleeping, because you're facing some of the biggest decisions that you'll ever make in your life, about whether to stay or whether to go, even. And probably decisions that will have the biggest ramifications on your future. And if there's children, if you have children, on your children's lives. So it's not just you. So it's really important to make the best decisions for you. Maybe I would add also this, that a lot of people have the belief that staying in a marriage after a betrayal is a sign of weakness. And of course, I don't see that way, because I happen to know that I'm a very strong woman, and it took everything in me to stay. It was one of the hardest things that I ever did, and there's no weakness in it whatsoever. But the strength is neither in the staying nor is it in the going, because a woman who has an unfaithful husband, or a man that has an unfaithful wife, who refuses to change, who keeps getting involved in this behavior, and some do, some will never change. It takes just as much strength to leave a marriage. So get help. That's really the thing. Don't try to do this alone. That'd be my
Exactly.
advice.
Yeah, both sides require lots of strength. Like you were very strong, like for reading it, because like I don't know how I could doing this and also have kids. Like that's really admirable. Well, just thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed talking to you and just speaking about this, learning more about your book. There's just so many questions I had reading it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Ariba, and thank you for interviewing me. And I wish you lots of success with your Writers Summit. So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Goodbye then.